I was about to step into my car when my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message that froze my breath. Call me immediately. It's about your son. The sender was Thomas, my attorney of 20 years, a man who never wasted words. My hand trembled as I dialed. The moment his voice came through, calm yet laced with urgency, I knew my world was about to tilt on its axis. Before I continue, let me ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments what time it is where you're watching. It helps this community grow, and I promise, this story is one you won't forget. Daniel, Thomas said, I hate to tell you this over the phone, but you need to know the truth. Your son Matthew has filed papers against you. He's trying to have you removed from your own company. The words were like a punch to the chest. My son, my only son, seeking to rip from me the business I had built with my own hands. I leaned against the hood of my car, the cool metal steadying me while my heart roared in my ears. That's impossible, I muttered. Matthew loves the company. He's worked beside me for years. Not anymore, Thomas replied, his voice tightening. He's gathered a group of shareholders. Their claim is that you're unfit, too emotional, too tied to outdated methods. They want him in charge, immediately. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. 35 years of sweat, sleepless nights, and sacrifice, all for Matthew, all for our family, was now being weaponized against me. My throat went dry. When did this happen? The petition was filed yesterday. You'll be summoned in court within a week. We don't have much time. The asphalt beneath my feet seemed to tilt. I gripped the phone tighter. What evidence could he possibly have? Statements from board members, financial records painted to look reckless, notes from meetings where they claim you were unstable. They've been preparing this for months, Daniel. I'm sorry. I shut my eyes, forcing air into my lungs. Instability. Reckless. Every decision I made had been for the company's survival, for growth, for him. I thought back to the late nights when I tucked files under my arm instead of tucking Matthew into bed. Was this how he had interpreted it all? Neglect disguised as love? Thomas's voice cut through the storm in my head. Listen to me. We need documentation, proof of your competence. Medical evaluations, financial evidence, character witnesses. Everything you have. I'll build the case, but you must hold yourself together. I sank into the driver's seat, the leather suddenly cold against my back. My hands rested on the steering wheel, frozen, while headlights passed in the fading dusk. I was supposed to be driving to dinner with Matthew and his family tonight, our weekly ritual. Now the thought of sitting across from him, sharing a meal, pretending all was normal, felt like a cruel performance. But maybe that was what I needed, to see his face, to understand what had transformed the boy I raised into the man plotting to destroy me. When I finally pulled up to his house, the porch light glowed warmly against the evening shadows. Matthew opened the door before I could knock, wearing the same confident smile he'd worn since he was a teenager. Dad, right on time, he said, his tone smooth, almost rehearsed. I studied him as he ushered me inside. His wife, Claire, greeted me with a hug that lingered too long, as though covering unease. Their son, little Jacob, bounded into the room, arms outstretched. Grandpa! His innocent laugh cut straight through the tension. I scooped him up, clinging to that fleeting purity before setting him down again. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the air, but smelled like lies. I watched Matthew move through the kitchen with the ease of a man in control, pouring wine, smiling too easily, masking something deeper. Dad, you look tired, he said casually as we Saturday. Maybe you should slow down at work. Let others handle more. His words dripped with suggestion. I forced a chuckle. Work keeps me sharp. And besides, no one knows this company better than I do. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. I sipped the wine slowly, every nerve alert. Sitting across from my son, I realized I no longer recognized him. And as his wife set down the plates and Jacob chattered about school, I could feel it in my bones. My son was preparing to take everything from me. The dinner table was set as though nothing was wrong, but I could feel the undercurrent beneath every polite word. Claire moved between the stove and the counter with practiced grace, smiling too brightly, her voice a little too cheerful. It was the kind of tone people use when they know a storm is coming, but they're trying to convince themselves the skies are clear. Jacob chattered on about his day at school, showing me a crayon drawing he had made, stick figures holding hands, one labeled Dad, one labeled Mom, and another with shaky letters spelling Grandpa. I forced a smile and kissed the top of his head, but my eyes drifted back to Matthew. He sat at the head of the table, carving the roasted chicken with steady hands, his expression calm and controlled, the perfect host. But I noticed the flicker in his eyes, the quick glance toward me, as if measuring my strength. "Dad, I know you've been working harder than ever," he said casually, placing a slice of chicken on my plate. "Maybe too hard. I worry about you sometimes. You should rest more, enjoy life. Let younger hands take the reins." His words landed like carefully sharpened blades hidden in soft wrapping. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to respond evenly. "Work is what keeps me alive, Matthew. Building the company wasn't just my job, it's who I am. You know that." He smiled politely, but didn't answer, his knife glinting in the light as he sliced more meat. Claire glanced at him, then at me, her eyes betraying tension. She sipped her wine quickly, as though trying to mask her discomfort. I studied my son's face, looking for the boy I once knew, the boy who had followed me around the garage as I worked on prototypes, his eyes wide with wonder. But all I saw now was calculation. As Jacob went to wash his hands before dessert, Matthew leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Dad, don't you think it's time to think about succession? You've always said you wanted the company to stay in the family. Isn't it better to make the transition while you're still around to guide it?" His tone was smooth, but underneath it I could hear the steel. I set down my fork. "You're talking like I'm already finished. Do you really think I'm not capable of running my own company?" The air grew heavy. Claire froze in mid-motion, her eyes wide. Matthew didn't flinch. "I think the company needs stability, Dad. Needs leadership that isn't clouded by emotion." The word hung there like poison. I felt the blood rush in my ears. Emotion. That was what Thomas had warned me they would claim, that my decisions were driven by sentiment, not strategy. I forced myself to breathe slowly to keep control. Losing my temper now would only feed his narrative. The rest of dinner passed in a haze of forced conversation. Claire asked about old family vacations, Jacob proudly displayed another drawing, and Matthew discussed industry trends with the ease of a man preparing his case. I answered politely, but my mind was elsewhere, spinning, calculating. Every smile he gave me felt like part of script. Every word about the future was a veiled threat. After dessert, I excused myself early, claiming an early meeting. Claire hugged me at the door, whispering, "He still loves you, you know." Her voice trembled, betraying her doubt even as she said it. Matthew shook my hand firmly, his grip strong, his smile unwavering. "Drive safe, Dad. Roads are slick tonight." I walked out into the cold evening air, my coat pulled tight against the biting wind. The porch light glowed warmly behind me, but I felt no warmth, only the chill of betrayal. Sitting in my car, I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the house where my son was tucking in his child, where a family dinner had just unfolded like any other. To an outsider, it would look perfect. But inside those walls, my own flesh and blood was preparing to strip me of everything I had built. The drive home blurred into streaks of headlights and rain. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt hollow, drained of everything except a gnawing sense of disbelief. I entered my study, the room lined with framed photos, awards, and decades of achievements. I looked at a picture of Matthew as a boy, standing beside me at a company picnic, his small hand clutching mine, his face lit with pride. I whispered to the empty room, "When did you stop being that boy?" I poured myself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the lamplight, and sat heavily in my chair. The silence of the house pressed in on me. I thought of my late wife, how she had always warned me to spend more time with Matthew, to show him that family came before business. I had always believed that building a secure future was love, that the sacrifices I made were for him. But had he only seen absence, neglect, a father married to his work instead of to his family? The clock ticked past midnight as I sifted through memories, missed baseball games, rushed birthdays, canceled vacations. Regret gnawed at me, but another voice rose inside. Regret could not erase betrayal. Whatever pain he felt, it didn't justify trying to destroy me. I turned to my desk and pulled open a drawer filled with files. Contracts, financial records, letters from employees whose lives had been changed by the company. Each document was a testament to my competence, my vision, my humanity. I stacked them carefully, already thinking of what Thomas had said. We had only days to prepare. At 1 a.m., I sat back in my chair, staring at the city lights flickering through the window. Somewhere out there, my son was probably sleeping soundly, believing his plan was airtight. He thought he knew me. He thought he could take what was mine. But as I sat there in the dark, I felt something rise within me, Not despair, not weakness, but resolve. If he wanted a fight, he would find out just how much fight his father had left. The morning after that dinner, I woke with a weight pressing on my chest heavier than any workload I'd ever carried. I barely slept. My mind had churned through every conversation with Matthew over the past year, dissecting each word, wondering how long this betrayal had been growing in silence. Had I missed the signs? Or had he hidden them so well because he knew exactly how to strike? The sun barely cut through the gray clouds outside, and the city looked as though it too was bracing for something grim. At 9, I was already at Thomas's office. His receptionist ushered me in with an expression that betrayed she knew more than she was allowed to say. Thomas was waiting in the conference room, sleeves rolled up, a stack of files already spread across the table like a battlefield map. He looked up as I entered, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Daniel, we don't have time to waste. Sit down. We're going to war." He slid a folder across to me. Inside were copies of the filings Matthew had submitted, formal, cold, clinical. My son's name at the top of the page accusing me of incompetence cut deeper than any blade. I read line after line describing me as irrational, unfit, dangerous to the stability of my own company. Statements from board members painted me as temperamental, driven by outdated ideas, blinded by personal attachments. Every passionate defense I had ever made for my employees, every moment I had fought for integrity over easy profit, had been twisted into evidence of instability. I clenched my jaw, the paper crinkling in my hands. "This is all lies." Thomas leaned forward. "Not lies. Half-truths. The most dangerous weapon in a courtroom. They take what's real, your passion, your grief after your wife died, your stubbornness when it came to preserving company culture, and they reframe it as weakness. That's why we need overwhelming evidence in the opposite direction." We spent hours gathering. I pulled out 3 decades of financial records showing steady growth, sustainable profits, employee retention rates higher than the industry average. Thomas called in his assistant, who began scheduling appointments with doctors for evaluations, physical, psychological, cognitive. I would undergo every test possible to prove my sharpness. "We'll flood them with proof," Thomas said, his voice steady. "No one will call you incompetent when they see numbers like these." By midday, my longtime friend and business partner, Richard, arrived. His face was grim, his shoulders hunched. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I heard from one of the shareholders. Matthew's been promising them dividends that aren't possible. He's selling them fantasies of explosive profits, telling them he'll modernize overnight, slash costs, and make them richer. They're buying it because they want to believe in quick returns." He dropped a thick envelope of printouts onto the table. Emails, projections, meetings he's held behind your back. I scanned through them. Matthew had been meticulous, approaching each shareholder with tailored promises. To one, he offered inflated revenue forecasts. To another, he promised efficiency studies that looked impressive on paper but collapsed under scrutiny. He'd painted me as the obstacle, the stubborn patriarch clinging to outdated practices. I sank into my chair, rubbing my temples. "He learned this from me," I said bitterly. "I taught him how to negotiate, how to win people over. And now he's using every skill I gave him against me." Richard put a hand on my shoulder. "Then it's time to remind him who taught the lesson. He thinks he's ready to replace you, but he doesn't know the strength it took to build all this. You're not finished, Daniel. Not yet." The rest of the day blurred into preparation. My office at the company became a command center. Boxes of records were stacked along the walls, decades of decisions cataloged and ready to be scrutinized. Thomas's paralegals worked late into the evening, drafting motions, highlighting inconsistencies in Matthew's claims. The hum of printers, the rustle of paper, the murmur of strategists filled the air like the preparations for a siege. As the city lights flickered on outside, I found myself staring out the window of my office on the 34th floor, looking over the skyline I had watched grow along with my company. For 35 years, I had built this with nothing but grit and relentless determination. Every brick, every deal, every late night spent hunched over blueprints and balance sheets had been for a dream, not for myself, but for Matthew, for the family I wanted to provide for. And now that dream had been twisted into a weapon aimed at my own chest. Around 10, the office quieted. Thomas was still working down the hall, his light spilling into the corridor. I sat at my desk, turning over a photograph I kept in the top drawer. Matthew as a boy, maybe 10 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a company groundbreaking ceremony. His grin had been so wide, his eyes bright with pride. I remembered how he had told me that day, "Someday, Dad, I want to build something just like you." A knot formed in my throat. How had we gone from that boy to this man, filing lawsuits, rallying others to declare me unfit? Was it my fault? Had my devotion to the company blinded me to the cracks forming in our bond? My wife used to tell me that Matthew needed more of my presence, not just my provision. He needs his father, not just a future, she'd said. I thought I had more time. I thought he understood. But there was no time for regret now. Regret wouldn't save what I had built, wouldn't protect the livelihoods of the thousands of employees who depended on me, wouldn't preserve a legacy that was supposed to be our family's. I straightened in my chair, setting the photo back into the drawer. If Matthew wanted to challenge me, then I would fight with every tool at my disposal. I had built an empire from nothing. I would not let it be stolen in silence. When I finally left the office close to midnight, the streets were slick with rain. The city seemed endless and cold, but inside me something had shifted. I was no longer paralyzed by disbelief. The shock had hardened into resolve. I knew the battle ahead would be brutal. I knew it would tear at me in ways I wasn't sure I could endure. But one truth burned clear in my mind as I drove home through the wet, glistening streets. I was not done fighting. Not for my company, not for my name, and not for the part of my son that I still hoped I could reach. The courthouse loomed ahead of me, its stone facade slick with rain, the morning sky a sheet of gray pressing down on the city. My shoes echoed sharply against the wet pavement as I climbed the steps, each one heavier than the last. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet intensity. Reporters whispered, shareholders gathered in hushed groups, lawyers shuffled papers with the precision of soldiers preparing for battle. I took my seat at the defense table, my heart steady, my face composed. 35 years of building my company had taught me how to weather storms, but nothing had prepared me for the storm of seeing my son across the aisle, flanked by attorneys who treated him like a prizefighter about to deliver the knockout blow. Matthew avoided my eyes, his jaw tight, his suit perfectly tailored. He looked every inch the confident young executive, the kind of man the shareholders wanted to believe in. Claire sat behind him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable. Our grandson Jacob wasn't there, thank God. At least he was spared from witnessing the ugliness of this war. The judge entered, his gavel striking wood with a sharp crack. Court is now in session. My lawyer, Thomas, rose to speak, his voice calm but edged with steel. Your Honor, this case is about more than numbers. It is about loyalty, truth, and the legacy of a man who has built something lasting, not just for himself, but for thousands of employees and their families. His words rolled through the courtroom like a steady drumbeat. Then it was Matthew's counsel's turn, a sharp-tongued woman named Laura, whose reputation for tearing apart family businesses was legendary. She painted me as a relic, a grieving widower whose mind had lost its edge, a stubborn patriarch who clung to outdated practices while the world moved forward. I listened as she spun her story, each phrase carefully designed to sting. She cited board meeting transcripts, financial decisions I had made that prioritized people over raw profit, moments when I had raised my voice to defend an employee or an initiative that didn't fit neatly into the shareholders' spreadsheets. Every passionate act of leadership was twisted into instability. Every decision guided by values was reframed as weakness. And then Matthew himself was called to the stand. My son walked with a confidence that seemed rehearsed. He raised his hand, swore to tell the truth, and then sat tall, his voice steady as he spoke. My father has always been passionate, but passion is not the same as sound judgment. His grief has clouded his decisions. He resists modernization. He refuses to implement changes that could double our growth. I love him, but the company needs leadership that can adapt, that can put results before sentiment. His words were daggers, delivered calmly, each one meant to cut without showing the hand that wielded it. I felt the breath of every person in the room tighten as he spoke. To them, he was the devoted son reluctantly stepping in to save the family legacy from a failing father. But to me, he was a stranger. I kept my eyes fixed on him, searching for the boy who once begged me to take him to the office, the boy who proudly called me his hero. He never looked at me once. When it was our turn, Thomas dismantled the facade piece by piece. He presented the financial records showing consistent growth under my leadership, the employee retention rates that outshined every competitor, the letters of loyalty from staff who had worked with me for decades. He called witnesses who testified to my clarity, my decisiveness, my integrity. Doctors presented clean bills of mental and physical health, test results that proved my competence beyond doubt. The tide began to shift. I could see it in the way some shareholders leaned forward, murmuring among themselves. Laura objected, tried to rattle me during cross-examination, but I stayed calm, steady. When she accused me of being ruled by emotion, I replied firmly, emotion is not weakness. It's the recognition that business is built on people, not just profits. Passion is not instability, it is the fuel that built this company from nothing. My words carried through the chamber, and for a moment even the judge's pen paused over his notes. Then Thomas revealed the evidence of Matthew's promises, grand projections that could never be delivered, secret meetings where he pledged impossible dividends, and financial irregularities that suggested desperation rather than vision. I saw Matthew's composure falter. His jaw clenched tighter, his hands fidgeted on the stand. For the first time in this battle, doubt flickered across his face. When the hearing concluded for the day, I stepped out into the rain-soaked streets with Thomas at my side. The weight of the fight pressed down on me, but beneath it pulsed something stronger, resolve. I knew this war was not over, but I also knew I would not crumble. I had faced competitors larger, markets harsher, challenges deeper than this. What made this battle unbearable was not the fight itself, it was that my opponent was my son. That night, alone in my study, I poured a drink and stared out over the city lights. My desk was covered in documents, photos, evidence of a lifetime's work. Beside them lay a crayon drawing Jacob had given me weeks earlier, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath the sun. I traced the childish lines with my finger, my throat tight. This was what I had fought for all these years, family. And yet, here I was, forced to defend myself against my own blood. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if Matthew and I will ever find our way back from this canyon that's opened between us. But I do know this, I am not finished. I will not be erased by ambition, not silenced by betrayal. Whatever happens, I will face it standing tall, with every ounce of strength left in me. And now, if you followed the story with me, I want to ask you something. Subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means more than you know, and there are always more stories to tell.